This is a reading from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. Now concerning the matters which you wrote, it is well for a man not to touch a woman. But because of cases of sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a set time, to devote yourselves to prayer, and then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. This I say by way of concession, not of command. I wish that we were as I myself am. But each has a particular gift from God, one having one kind and another kind. To the unmarried and the widows I say that it is well for them to remain unmarried as I am. But if they are not practicing self-control, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to be aflame with passion. To the married I give this command, but not I, but the Lord, that the wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does separate, let her remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and that the husband should not divorce his wife. To the rest I say, and I and not the Lord, that if any believer has a wife who is an unbeliever, and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. And if any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever, and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is made holy through his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy through her husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. But if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such a case, the brother or sister is not bound. It is to peace that God has called you. Wife, for all you know, you might save your husband. Husband, for all you know, you might save your wife. However that may be, let each of you lead the life that the Lord has assigned, to which God has called you. This is my rule in all the churches. The word of the Lord. Well, isn't that fun? Would you like to come and talk about this, Father? I know, yeah, thanks a lot. You know, as the old saying goes, our beloved Paul the theologian has gone from preaching to meddling. Paul the theologian has now become a sexual therapist and a marriage counselor. And we need to take account of this, what Paul has to say. Let's just kind of review what he's talking about. He's talking about the relationship between a man and a woman in marriage, talking about a sexual relationship between the two of them. He's talking about those who are unmarried, either widows or single, that they should try to remain unmarried if possible, and if they can't control their passions, then to become married. Then he talks about those who are married to an unbeliever, that they have the ability to save that unbeliever if they stay married to him, but if the unbeliever wants to leave, then that's fine. And then he talks about divorce and and he says this particular thing, that this is what the Lord commands. He talks about how he doesn't want people to get divorced. Let's think about why Paul would talk this way and why he wants to give this advice to his church. First, we need to remember that this, again, you've heard this over and over about the Corinthian church, that it's a very young church. These are people who have just come to Christ in a culture that is not Christian, doesn't know anything about the Christian life. And Paul's trying to set up a custom for them to live by. There's no tradition in this culture. You know, we look back and we have a tradition of Christianity that goes back almost 2,000 years and people dealing with different moral issues, but these people did not. Their morality is in that culture, and that culture was full of pagan beliefs about sexuality and about marriage and all sorts of things. The very first line that's in this reading says, I'm now concerning the matters about which you wrote. It's well for a man not to touch a woman. That's a pagan belief that the man should not touch a woman. There was some sort of a pagan belief at that time that if you abstain from sexual relations, you're going to be more sophisticated and more glorious in the heights of the gods and all this kind of thing. And they're confused about this cultural thing that's been put upon them. And so Paul's trying to set up a Christian understanding of how you live as a Christian. And so we think about this now in terms of our own life. What possibly can this tell us about living our own life? Well, I tell you that I don't think our culture is much different than the culture that Paul was living in. We live in a pretty, we think we live in a Christian society, but I would beg to differ that we live in a society that's in its essence pretty pagan in a lot of its beliefs. And so can we learn anything from Paul, from this very young church that Paul's trying to teach how to do things? Because the culture that we live in is pretty much into sexual exploitation, into exploitation of those who are more vulnerable than we are. And what can we learn about how we can live in that kind of a society? And can we learn anything from Paul? I think Paul can teach us a morality, maybe not exactly like he wants, but a morality that will help us form how we treat one another. And he does that by teaching about who Jesus is and what Jesus did. Think about the life Jesus lived, how he treated those who were less well off than he was. Think about what Jesus said on the night that he was about to die, the night before he died. He gave his disciples a commandment. Do you remember what the commandment was? He gave them I give you a new commandment. We talk about that a lot on Maundy, Thursday. Love one another as I have loved you. Everything Paul talks about in this rather difficult lesson that we read today is about loving one another more than you love yourself. Listen, we live in a very narcissistic society. Everything is about me. It's about me and my rights, and don't offend me, don't do anything against me. And that is not the way Jesus wants us to live our life. We're supposed to live our life where we love one another the way Jesus loved us. How did Jesus love us? He loved us by giving himself as an offering and a sacrifice. So if we look at all of these ways that Paul's talking about people living together, husband and wife, the unmarried, those who are maybe thinking about divorce, those who are living with an unbeliever. It's about thinking about the other and giving to the other more than you give to yourself. It's a Greek word for that all of you have probably heard many times, called agape. It's that kind of love, that self-giving love that Jesus gave. And if we can live our lives like Jesus then a lot of these problems that Paul's talking about will solve themselves. This young church didn't know that well. And Paul's trying to teach them what it's like to live a self-giving life like Jesus wants us to live. And so when we read all these things, it's maybe a mirror into our own lives to remind us how we can live the way Jesus wants us to live out in the world. Amen? All right.